Moving back to Israel now, right-wing leaders Itamar Ben-Gvir and Bezalel Smotrich reuniting their parties just a week or so after their split, as former Premier Netanyahu convinces them not to divide their voter base. For details on this merger and more, Marc Schulman, political analyst and editor of HistoryCentral.com. Marc, it's great to be back with you. So does this merger put an end to issues within the right-wing parties and pave a path towards victory for the opposition? Or do you think that the division reunion was maybe just a big negotiation gamble, perhaps, to reestablish Knesset lists between the two parties?
Neither, I think. I mean, look, the reality is they came to an agreement. All along, it was just a play by Ben-Gvir to get additional power between the two. He's the more popular of the two, and he thought he should get a higher place, or evenly divided between the two lists is what he got. He would have liked to be number one, but he gave in to be number two of this joint list. It eliminates the chance of one of the far-right parties being forced off the election because they don't have enough votes. They're not passing the minimum needed in order to get into the Knesset. So that's no longer going to happen. That's finished. I mean, there's still a fight right now going on within Yahadut Torah, and they could divide up, and that would be even worse for Netanyahu. But that's a different story altogether. Look, there isn't a lot of ideological difference between Smotrich and Ben-Gvir. Ben-Gvir is a little bit more charismatic, and it's seemingly a little bit more extreme. He's managed to get more extremist supporters. Smotrich is a little not as charismatic, and I think that's why Ben-Gvir has gone up so much. One of the big questions that historians will ask ourselves going forward 10 years from now is, why did these two parties, at least as it seems, gained so much power in the last 2 or 3 years and so much support, especially considering the fact that, relatively speaking, security-wise, these have been relatively quiet years.
How would you answer that question?
It's one of the interesting things. I don't really have an answer to the question. I mean, some of it has to do with some of the rioting that took place in the mixed towns. Beyond that, I would think it's an accumulation of education, right-wing education that's taken place in this country over 40 years without any balance on the other side. And finally, I have a feeling, and I can't really prove this, is a lot of the support comes from the Haredi, not from members of the Haredi communities. If we look at the Haredi vote over the last 20 years, it has not increased substantially. Mm-hmm. While on the other hand, their population has almost doubled. So the question is, where did all those votes go? I would hazard a guess, and it's only a guess, that a substantial amount of those votes are going to the far-right parties. And I think, someday we'll understand that totally. But I think that's one of the things that's happening. And people aren't paying enough attention to the fact that, look, they should be much larger now. Think back 20 years ago, they were the same basic size as they are today. Right. And their population has grown so much. So what's happened?
Right. All right. Well, in response to the reunion, Meretz's new head, jumping now all the way to the left, Meretz's new head, Zehava Galon, hinted at a new potential merger of her own with the left-wing Labour Party under Merav Michaeli. Would that be a wise decision? Do they share enough of a political base? And are they currently dividing that base?
They're identical, frankly. I mean, I would need a microscope to see the difference between the two parties, especially with their new lists. I mean, Michaeli has this obsession, in my opinion, in a belief that she can bring back Labour to what it once was as a central party in the country. It's not going to happen anytime soon. And I'm sorry she's obsessed with that. That's the only way I can describe it. If you look at the members of their two lists, it would be hard to see which one of them couldn't be elected in the other list. They are identical, obviously, but very, very similar in their beliefs. They're similar in their socioeconomic backgrounds. There is no reason why these two parties shouldn't merge other than egos on both their parts, in my opinion. And there's a lot of calling at this point amongst the people on the left saying, merge the parties. No one wants to take a chance. And no one wants another, what one would call the Gewalt campaign of Meretz, which was in the last couple of years. Vote for Meretz, because if not, we're going to fall under. Now, Michaeli makes the argument that if you merge the two parties, the total number of votes the two parties will get will probably be lower. And that's probably true, because there are a fair number of Gewalt voters, I'll call them at the moment, who, if they're merged and they're not afraid they're gonna fall below, are going to vote for Lapid because they want Lapid to be a much larger party. So she's right in the sense that in total, if they merge, they probably get less votes. But the chances of one of those two parties coming in under the numbers that needed to get into the Knesset is real, and it exists. And I think not doing it would be a tremendous disservice for the left. and I think in the end they'll do it, but who knows? Egos are a very powerful thing, as we saw with Ben Gvir and with Micheli in the same situation, I think.
So again, not just those two mergers, you also then have Gantz and Sa'ar famously merging their two parties recently. Is fewer larger parties perhaps the answer for Israel's gridlocked government? You know, no kingmaker parties, for example, with 4 people who can dictate to the majority in the coalition. But then at the same time, of course, you have every party would have too many clashing voices, perhaps.
Right. I mean, that's part of the problem. Number one, we're not getting to 2 parties or even 3 parties. We're still going to end up with 8 or 9 parties, which is not exactly a recipe for a government that is very stable. Number 2, of course, we saw what happened in this election when you had a broad coalition, or not this past government, we had a broad coalition. The opposition was able to pick off 1 or 2 people and bring down the government. Look, the answer to Israel's situation of government is a change in the system, but no one is really pushing for a change. Everyone knows the country needs a change, but no one is willing to bring about a change. It's been going on for 40 years or more. The situation, the system was inherited from the World Zionist Organization, and in all the years of statehood, we've only made minor changes and not made the sort of changes necessary to really have a stable government.
All right, and could you give me maybe an example of 1 or 2 of those changes that you would push for?
Okay, the most immediate change that I would do is I would have regional elections. That's number 1. I would have every person gets to vote for the people in their particular region. So A, I'm represented by someone from my neighborhood, my area. B, the best person in my area would run as opposed to somebody who has to join the Likud or the Labour Party or whichever party and be in the party for 20 years. No, if I'm the best person in my area, I could run and be elected, and that would bring a better person into the Knesset. Plus, in addition, more responsive to the views of this particular neighborhood or this area, for instance.
All right, Marc Schulman, thank you very much.
My pleasure.